Hello folks. Whether you like it or not, the age of Magnus Carlsen is coming to an end. He will at some point be replaced as the strongest human on the planet, and that might be happening sooner than you expect. On the horizon, we have this 10-year-old Argentine prodigy by the name of Faustino Oro, who has just become the youngest master in history, is already defeating the world's top players in online Blitz, with his rating on chess.com hovering right around 3,000. And I'm going to show you two of these games right now. First, a Blitz game from just a few days ago in which he defeated Hikaru Nakamura, and then we will briefly look at the bullet game from March 23rd where he took down none other than Magnus Carlsen himself. So let's get right into it. First we have the Blitz game with Hikaru Nakamura. Faustino is playing white. Hikaru goes for a modern defense with the c6 line preparing d5. We have c3, a nice super solid central structure from Faustino. d5 hits the e4 pawn, and here's a little quiz position for you. How would you defend this pawn on e4? Well, the best move according to the engine is to just push the pawn with e5. Also reasonable is knight b to d2. You can take on d5, that's alright too, but the worst way to deal with that attack on your e-pawn would be to play bishop to d3. This is the move that was played in the game. Or I guess queen to c2 would be bad also, because this would allow a move that Hikaru did not play. D takes e4, bishop takes e4, and then knight to f6 with tempo on the bishop. There's no real good reason to give up your bishop for this knight here, so you should really drop the bishop back and then black can continue c5. Why that didn't happen, I don't know, but Hikaru instead goes for bishop to g4. And again, the best move is to just push the pawn, but here we have castles. And again, Hikaru does not take on e4. He plays a move that, according to the engine, is already a losing move. He plays knight to f6. And this time Faustino does find the best move. He plays e5, driving the knight to d7. And why is this so bad for black? The engine thinks it's almost two pawns in white's favor. Well, I guess we're going to find out. h3 is what Faustino plays. And you really have to trade bishop for knight here. If you go back to e6, well, knight to g5, that's not really very good. This kind of thing is not desirable for black. The queen comes in here, attacks the pawn. How are you defending that? So, what's played is bishop takes f3, queen takes, and now we have e6. And now a very nice move from Faustino. This is a top engine move, queen to e2. When I saw this, I thought, what exactly does that accomplish? Well, it defends the b2 pawn because Faustino has foreseen that Hikaru's play is going to be over here on the queen side. He's expecting what happens next, c5, after which he can just continue bishop to e3 with no problems. If this queen was still on f3, then black could play queen to b6, and it would actually be a decent move because it would be attacking b2. That's what you would play if white took the pawn here. You'd take the pawn on b2, but since the queen is defended, now what are you going to do? You can't capture on c5 because after knight takes c5, b4 is a big problem. The knight's pinned. So it's just a prophylactic move by Faustino. Very insightful move for such a young player. We have knight to c6 from Hikaru. Okay, knight to d2. Pawn takes, pawn takes. Now queen to b6, a double attack, hitting that d4 pawn, also hitting b2. Fortunately, knight to f3 defends both. And it still looks fairly reasonable for black here. I mean, I wouldn't guess that black is hopelessly lost. The engine's giving almost 1.5 pawns in white's favor. But Hikaru castles, we got rook a to c1. The rooks get moving into some pretty normal looking squares here. We got a6 from Hikaru, just biding his time. And now here we go with a kingside attack. Because look at the three minor pieces all ready to jump into the king side. The queen can join in the fight. Hikaru's minor pieces and queen are in no position to come to that side of the board to help defend anything. So we're threatening h5 here. Hikaru doesn't want that, so he plays h5 himself. Now, bishop to b1 from Faustino, very nice. This adds some defense to the d4 pawn because he wants to move that knight in a second. Knight to e7, and here we go with knight to g5. Threatening g4 now. Now the best try for Hikaru, according to the engine, would just be to play bishop to h6. Got to just start eliminating pieces around the king. You know, you can take out the knight on g5, which isn't great, but it's the best try. But now, instead of that, Hikaru plays knight to f5, which is totally losing. By force, the knight is taken out, and then you have to take with the e pawn. If you were to take with the g pawn, well then queen takes h5 is a big problem. So you take with the e pawn, and then queen to f3. Beautiful, a top engine move, again, hitting d5. And how are you defending that pawn? There's not a lot of options. In fact, queen to b5 seems to be the only option. Only problem with queen to b5 is it takes the queen's eyes off of that e6 square, which allows this beautiful e6 shot. And as black, you really have to take out the pawn because this is threatened. So Hikaru takes on e6. We got knight takes e6. A couple of rooks come off the board. And then, since the rook on f8 is hit, it moves to f6, attacking that knight, which jumps to c7, hitting the queen with a double attack on the d5 pawn. Hikaru tries to get some counterplay with queen takes b2, but here comes queen takes d5 check, hitting this knight on d7. The only reasonable way to get out of check and defend that knight is to play rook to f7, but now comes a very nasty move, knight to e6. We're threatening knight to g5, which would attack that rook and pin it with the queen. It also opens up a possible rook check on c8. A lot of threats in the air. Queen to b5. Hikaru has decided that white queen cannot stay there. It must be removed from the board. But we have this rook check first. The knight blocks with knight to f8. The queens come off the board. And here comes the d pawn. And here comes bishop to c5, increasing pressure on that knight, which is pinned on f8. What are you going to do as black? Well, Hikaru gives it a good try. He plays f4. And after bishop c5, rook to f5, bishop takes f8, bishop takes, here comes the d6 pawn. The king does get to f7, but now knight takes, winning the piece. The rook tries to go to d5, but here comes d7. And at this point, Hikaru Nakamura resigns. He sees that the pawn is unstoppable. If you try to get the king involved, there's just going to be rook e8 check, and then the pawn's going to promote. So what a performance by a 10-year-old taking down one of the, if not the, greatest blitz player on the planet, the legendary Hikaru Nakamura. But this is not just a one-time fluke. We have seen him beat other top players, including the great Magnus Carlsen in this bullet game we're about to look at. Faustino again has the white pieces, and we have a modern defense, once again, which sort of transposes into some kind of Alekine's defense. Okay, so in this game, what we're going to see is Magnus Carlsen playing very well despite his opening, which was a little substandard. This is what these top players like to do against these young upstarts. They play an opening which is not played very often for a good reason, because it's usually not a very good opening, but they just want to get him out of their comfort zone. But what happens, unfortunately, is Magnus Carlsen, right around here, yes, he neglects his queenside pawns very severely. He allows this queen trade, and then the pawn on b7 drops. Also possible was knight to b5, a double attack on those two pawns. I mean, it is a bullet game, so you don't expect perfection. But Magnus Carlsen defended pretty well despite his completely lost position here, and he even manages to exchange off pieces, put his minor pieces on very active squares in the center of the board, like so, and more or less equalize the game, despite being a pawn down. His active pieces are compensating him. But then, in what I have to assume was just severe time trouble, I mean, it is a 1-minute bullet game, Magnus Carlsen unfortunately chose the move knight to a2. Now, was it a mouse slip? Did he just forget about this knight on c1? I don't know, but after knight takes a2, it's obviously over for black. Carlsen played on a little bit, but when he saw his young opponent was not going to let him get out of this, he decided to resign in this position right here, being a whole piece down with absolutely no hope. So I hope you enjoyed those two games. This young Faustino Oro is definitely a player to watch. I expect great things. This is reminiscent of the feeling I remember having in the early 2000s when I started hearing about the young Magnus Carlsen and thinking that he would one day be world champion. So thank you for watching. Please subscribe for more content similar to this coming your way soon. See you on the next video.